Welcome to Sunrise Life, the podcast where we have deep conversations with fellow freelance models. And today I'm talking with Jessa Ray Muse, and we are going to go down the rabbit hole on reference checking for models and for photographers, because yes, photographers, you should be doing your research too, because it's very important and we're going to talk about it. So say hello, Jessa.
Hey.
I'm so glad that you brought this topic up to me. I didn't have a podcast scheduled for this coming week, so I'm glad that you texted me with this idea.
Right on. Yeah, I'm a big fan of your podcast. I listen every week. I refer people to it all the time. I think it's a really important resource in the community for everyone to listen to. Just, there's a lot of photographers who have mentioned that they learn a lot from it, and they're really nice guys who then say, that, oh, I learned this or that, and I don't want to be one of those. And I really appreciate that they're actually taking the time to learn and grow.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that the willingness to learn new things is the spice of life. If you think you know everything, then you're just going to be a stick in the mud, right?
Yeah, for real. I mean, it's stagnance, Life is about growth. Actually, really quick side note, I homeschooled myself for high school, and one of the things that was my main goal was that, you got to learn something new every day, and we never stop learning. It's not just about school, it's about, if you're doing something where you learn something new every day, like you're really in a good flow of life, I guess. And, you don't want to ever get into a point where, you think you know everything and you're in stagnance. The more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
Yes, I agree with that fully. And then some photographers out there might not know that they should be doing their research in advance on the models that they work with. And I think that this is definitely something that can be very helpful to help people avoid having negative experiences. But before we start talking about that, let's talk about references in general. And I haven't yet had a specific episode about model safety and models checking references, even though that topic has been brought up probably in almost every single interview that I've done with models on this show. But let's do a little recap. What are references and why should we do them?
Yeah, sure. So, one main thing that I look at in references is like, obviously I look at their portfolio right off the bat, because depending on where they're messaging me, they usually have a portfolio attached. So that's a good precursor. And you can really tell a lot just from a portfolio without asking anybody, actually. Whether the models, do they look like happy and willing to be doing what they're doing? Do they look like scared or like deer in the headlights? You can see a lot from body language, right? Another thing is like pose frequency. I'm an art model. I don't do any open leg. I do up to art nude. And so for me, if I see a lot of poses in someone's portfolio where they're, wanting open leg with eye contact, or it's a lot of bent over or certain things, even with lingerie on, if it's not of a certain high quality of like really sexy glamour, I'm good. I'll pass. I don't need any more information.
Yeah. Totally. So know what you're getting into basically just by looking at the person who is contacting you to shoot and seeing at what they're posting already.
Yeah, exactly. And also, not only style, right? Because it's like, if I see a bunch of models that look like plastic maybe, or I don't know, a little more Barbie for lack of a better term, they're blonde or platinum, very glam, a lot of makeup, or potentially even over edited. I'm like, or big breasted. I'm not any of those things. That's another thing, so you kind of try not to like force yourself into someone's portfolio that it's just not a right fit. Don't put yourself in that position. It's kind of something else I've learned.
However, perhaps that photographer might be attempting to expand their horizons, so that might be worth a conversation.
Sure, and there are times where I have done that. It's very case by case basis,
Yeah, totally. But having that communication with that person that is contacting you to shoot, it can be very eye-opening, because they might say something that's very off-putting, or they might be very understanding and willing to adapt to your comfort zone or your style as well.
Yeah, I've definitely had people, comment, and I think I've heard you even say this before, where it's like, if they say, oh, well, I don't really see that in your portfolio. And it's like, well, which portfolio are you looking at for one? Like if you're just looking at Instagram, that's not going to cut it. You really need to go to my website. And that's where I have the best photos and the most frequently updated. And of course, Model Mayhem and Model Society. But, you know, model, on my website is where I show my full diversity. I do fetish, I do costuming, you know, I do figure modeling where I hold poses, you know, all these things, right? I have my whole range there. And so oftentimes I think people, if you're not frequently posting what they think or they haven't seen it, they think you can't do it. And it's once again on their side, right, to have the conversation because they don't know if you're willing to do it unless they ask.
Right. Yeah, especially important with social media because if you are me, for example, I cannot post any implied or censored nudes. I have to be wearing something in every photo on my social media, which means that some photographers might think that I don't pose nude anymore because Instagram is very strict with me where they're not so strict with other users. So I always include my portfolio link because it's a better way to understand like the range of what I do.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that brings up the next point, you know, it's like if say you're talking on Instagram, then I always ask if they don't have the link attached, do you have any other sites? Can I look at your portfolio elsewhere? And I ask this to everybody because I think it's important to treat everyone equally and also do the same work, no matter how quality their work is, no matter how many recognizable models they are, to make sure and double check everywhere else. Do they have Model Mayhem? Have they been kicked off potentially? You know, like, do they have Model Society? Do they have a website? Do they have a Flickr? You know, all these things, right? And SmugMug, you know, whatever. So it's like, and same thing too, what you were just saying with booking even. I try to take everything off of Instagram the moment I can. Send a cold call. They say, what are your rates? You know, I'm interested. What are your rates? Send them my link and say, please read through everything here. If that all looks good, fill out the form. And I mark it as tentative, I tell them, until I receive the form and the deposit. And that like helps me so much to just avoid problems and cancellations. And it makes me look very professional. And I've had a lot of photographers say, thank you. Wow, you're really professional, you know. And they're like, I wish more models did this. So pointers to the crew and everybody, like, you know, have everything outlined and clear. And if you can put a booking form on your website so they can just fill out everything they want to do in that shoot. And it will help you a lot streamline your bookings into your email because it will go to your email.
That's great. Yeah. And then in addition to seeking out references by looking at that photographer's work and contacting models that they've worked with in the past, another huge beneficial tool is being in these private group chats where models help each other out, like Facebook groups, Instagram chats. Like we have pooled together and we are a community now. And if we are having communication with a photographer that might be pulling some red flags in your chat, you can ask your peers in this group conversation, hey, has anybody worked with so-and-so? And if anybody in that group of people you're talking to has worked with them, they can let you know what their experience is like. Because there are some red flags that are just miscommunications, but there's some that are serious and you really want to avoid working with certain people. And without having a community of people that can help steer you away from bad photographers, then, you know, you avoid a lot of heartache.
Yeah, exactly. It's really, you know, near and dear to my heart to be able to feel like I can be a part of some certain, you know, communities and groups behind the scenes to be able to chat with the women in the community and ask around. Because, you know, as much as you think you're good at referencing after you get to a point with modeling, there's still things you can miss. People can slip under the wire, you know, and it's like you need to, say, you know, I work a lot in the West, but if I'm coming to like Ohio or Missouri or whatever, it's like, and there's this random person and I just don't know enough, just say, hey, you know, who knows something about this person? And there's always someone who does. And if they don't, maybe that's also like you know, this is where you decide, do you meet at a public, like, especially what if you're their first model? Okay, let's talk on that for a minute, right? I've been people's first model several times. And, you know, but I want them to at least have some kind of photography experience. I don't want them to have just picked up a camera, right? They've been shooting nature for 4 years, or they they shoot portraits and weddings or, like whatever, but it's their first, model shoot where they paid you or nude shoot, especially. And so there's things that you can do to prepare yourself and them. Like for one, meet in a public studio, I often think is good, especially if that place seems like it has video surveillance at the entrance. That's a good backup. Or the studio runner is on site, because I almost never bring a chaperone.
Yeah.
But if you're someone who travels with someone, bring someone, like just prepare them though, let them know this is what it's like to work with a model. So those are also good things because it's like everyone starts somewhere. So it's, if they're nice in communication, there's like worth giving a try, but some people are unwilling to give someone a try the first time. And I totally understand. It's a risk.
It is a risk. And you brought up the bringing an escort or a chaperone with you as a safety measure to shoots. I do see that topic being brought up all the time in like Facebook groups or in comments on posts when a model says that they had a negative experience. So many commenters say, oh, you should always have somebody with you. But if you're a full-time traveling model, it does not logistically make sense to have a bodyguard with you all the time. Like we're not making enough money to support another person's full-time income to be on the road with us, just to stand there and make sure that you're going to be safe, which is why we reference check so intensely, because we're doing our research in advance just so that we don't have to have somebody stand there and protect us.
Yeah, honestly, if I feel like I need to bring somebody, I might as well not do the shoot. Most of the time, is how I feel.
Yeah, totally. So where it is helpful if you are new to modeling and maybe you're working with people that like you're not connected to the community yet, you don't have those safety groups that you can get like lots of information from fellow models, and you're only doing a shoot here or there like once or twice a month, it might make sense to bring a friend with you. But once you start doing this full time and you have 30 shoots a month, it really is not logistically feasible to bring an escort with you.
Yeah, I mean, my husband gets bored. It's like if he comes on a trip, because he knows I've done my due diligence, so he's not like there usually trying to be vigilant on that. He's just like he came along on the trip, and so I'm doing a few shoots and then we're doing other things. Is often the only time when he will come along. I mean, I did go to New York City last year with him and we did 4 duos, and then I did some other shoots along there, and then he flew home before I did. So, he came along on a few shoots. There was one, this is a funny story. So I was at the Sandy Hook Nude Beach in New Jersey.
Oh boy.
Doing a shoot. And actually I don't have as many like weird nude beach stories as I've heard on this podcast. But like, I'm shooting with this guy. It's fine. And he's just he's a really nice GWC. But anyways, my husband's just, doing his own thing. He's collecting, glass on the beach, trash, shells, whatever. He's a good guy. But this random guy that this group is hanging out nude, right? They're doing some shibari, you can tell, over on their blanket, some friends. And then he ends up talking to my husband at one point, and which was kind of cool. Instead of coming up and interrupting our shoot, right? Or interrupting our shoot, he came up and asked, well, do I do OnlyFans and would I want to do a collab? And he has to explain to him, no, she's an art model. She doesn't even have OnlyFans, and she definitely not doing a collab in the way that he wanted to collab with me.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was interesting. But anyway, so, chaperones can, I guess, be helpful in that regard. The final little quick note on this side note about this shoot is that the photographer asked me if he could, at the very end of the shoot, okay, he asked me if he could just like expose himself to the nature real quick and be nude, because he doesn't get to be free like that often. And so I said, sure, that's fine. I'm going to turn my back and go over here and get dressed. And I didn't even, witness it. He like pulled his pants down. He didn't even get all the way nude and like faced the sea and almost did like a Titanic moment where he like spread his arms, was all I could really tell. And then that was like a few minutes, and then he pulled his pants back up and we were done. But, it's like, that was interesting. So anyways, chaperones, Dr. Chaperones. So in the very beginning of modeling, I did take chaperones. Like you said, it's more useful, I think, when you're first starting out. I took my cousin and my sister, and both of them ended up modeling alongside me as well. But we had the buddy system, right? Buddy system is good. And photographers are often more likely to say yes to these situations where it's a girlfriend or like a sister or a girlfriend instead of like, a boyfriend. And I have actually had one photographer who I quite like say, yeah, he's had more problems with boyfriends than husbands. He said husbands are secure. They know they've got you, but boyfriends, maybe not so much. I thought that was kind of funny. And that's probably true, actually, because I have heard stories where the boyfriend is sitting across the room or they're on the sideline, especially, and they're seeing the pose maybe very crotchy, but that's not how it's being photographed. And they jump to conclusions and make assumptions, and then they freak out and cause a problem. And I have heard that a couple times, but it's not that frequent. You shouldn't assume that the chaperone's going to do that.
Yeah. But I'm sure that one negative experience for a photographer makes them want to set expectations that that's never going to happen to them again.
Oh, yeah. And I understand, honestly, I understand both sides where people want to insist on always bringing a chaperone. And I understand where there's hesitancy on photographer sides because, once again, they have a risk and vulnerability to this situation. And, chaperones can be, they can come and maybe steal stuff. I've heard of this happening where it's like they end up, they'll say they want the chaperone to be out in the waiting room in the studio or something, maybe just so they don't interfere with the shoot, but within yelling distance in case the model needs help.
Right.
But, they don't want you around like with their back turned to you or something.
Yeah. That actually reminds me of a story. There's a photographer that I've worked with a bunch in Washington State who has a huge wardrobe with lots of costumes and jewelry and shoes that they actually belong to his wife because she's also very petite and a lot of models have the same clothing size as her. And they're so generous as to, allow models to use their wardrobe collection. And one day he had two models come in. It was a model and then her friend. And her friend brought a big bag, like a large duffel bag, handbag thing with her. And it was like pretty empty when she arrived. And when she left, it was like really full of stuff. And the photographer saw that she had left the dressing room and like walked out to her car with her bag now full and super heavy. And he knew that she had totally like ransacked his closet of jewelry, shoes, costumes, but he didn't have the heart to confront her about it. So he decided after that, no chaperones, and he's only going to work with experienced, vetted models. But this is, kind of segueing into why it's also important for photographers to do their research in advance of who they're working with. Yeah, it's obvious that models, especially full-time traveling nude models, should be doing the research in advance to make sure that we are safe because it is appearing to be more vulnerable. We are usually the smaller human in the pair between the photographer and the model. We're usually seemingly like needing more protection and needing more awareness of our surroundings. However, the photographer also, too, can be vulnerable. They have expensive equipment. In that case, lots of expensive jewelry and costumes. So there are times where it could be really harmful for the photographer if they are just booking with anybody without knowing who's coming to their house and what might happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've heard enough stories now that I feel like I have no problem. I mean, unless someone outright says no chaperones, and it just makes it, and then there's other things that like red flag me along the way. I often don't get red flagged by that anymore, but that's me. I understand everyone is their own situation. So, but I will ask for elaboration on it sometimes if I'm really trying to dig into whether or not to work with that person's.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Another thing that's really important is, but it's depending on the person, is Model Mayhem credits, right? So if for those, who don't know what Model Mayhem is, right, it's a website where, you can have a portfolio and you can post travel notices and even casting calls if you're looking for a model. You can find traveling models coming through your area. So it does have benefits. And also it is a credit system, which is a referencing system. So, and that's the main reason I use it, I think, still. And also I think it just makes you look good, like in the community. How long have you been on there? Do you maintain VIP status, which a lot of people do because it makes you look professional. You can send as many, messages. Anyway, all this stuff, right? So the credit system though, if I'm like going through friend requests, I won't just mass accept friend requests. And I understand a lot of people will because some people can't even message you until you've accepted their friend request, but maybe I don't want them to either. So it's like, I'll go through and I will actually click on each person and check them. What does their bio say? How many credits do they have? And that's usually the first thing I look at. And then it's like, okay, they have, say, 2 credits, but they've only been on since 2022. All right, sure. That's fine. I can deal with that. But say they have like 0 credits and they've been on there since 2008 and, they have a whatever else going on. I'm like, this is kind of red flaggy to me. And I'll check, do they have an Instagram linked or, and then even from there, does their style kind of match what I'm going for? And then decide from there whether to accept the friend request and send a message,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The verified credit system is definitely Model Mayhem's best feature. And I do agree with you. Like, even though the website is not as popular as it used to be, there's no Yelp for models and photographers. And this is really the only good way that a lot of people have already been using it in the past, where you can see who people have worked with and like what that person has said about them. However, there are some photographers that will coerce models into leaving a positive verified credit. And I do get a lot of people after a shoot, they'll say, hey, could you leave a verified credit for me? And if it was a positive experience, yeah, I'll definitely do it. But there's some that are totally weird that are trying to farm positive references from models using the Model Mayhem verified credit system, or even handwriting something or typing it out so that they can put it on their Facebook page. And I would say that if you see a photographer who has like really kind of shady vibes in their work, but lots of model positive notes, still definitely message those models individually and ask them what their experience was really like, because some of those references that are written online are coerced.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and you got to take each one with a grain of salt because, for one, say they left me a credit and I'm on a busy tour and, I go home and I just unplug for a minute and I don't take the time to reply back to the credit, but maybe I log in and I just approve it. So now it's blank on their page. Right. So I've approved it. Their credits on mine, but it's blank on their page. And say someone, looks at their profile and also sees, okay, it's blank. Like, they have a bunch of credits, but there's multiple blank credits. Well, blank credits are tricky because on one hand, it could simply be that, I was tired or maybe it's just, a little bit lazy and not reciprocating people's reviews. And so, it's just blank for that reason. Now it could be blank for a different reason. Maybe the model doesn't feel brave enough to actually reply with how they really feel about the shoot, so then there's that. And that they're leaving it so that at least that you worked with, the people who are looking for the credits know that, yeah, I worked with them or you worked with them, but we didn't have anything to say, and, I think if highly experienced models didn't have anything to say that was positive, there might be something off or negative even to say. And so I have heard of other models leaving blank reviews actually as a negative review, because you can't really leave a negative review because people won't approve it.
Yeah, right. That's very understandable too. I mean, like, if you leave a review and somebody doesn't approve it, then that's definitely an issue.
Yeah, I mean, this brings up a point of like, how do you even leave a negative review at that point, because basically what you can do is you can either be really brave and attempt to leave a negative review, or say you work with them 3 times and then on the 3rd time they were really off or they really went off the deep end. And so at least at that point, if you've already left one, you can revise your credit. But they still, usually even when you revise, you still get that notification about that it's been revised. So you could probably remove it. I've never removed any credits from mine, but I bet you could. And then, of course, your best bet is to report them to Model Mayhem. But one concern I have sometimes about reporting to Model Mayhem, because I've had this problem where I did report to Model Mayhem about shady people, and they wanted to like gaslight me and actually act like it was me being the problem. And I was like, excuse me, this person basically has stolen images. I'm certain at this point. And they are like insisting that I send, current pictures and that they, all this, just was all these things. And so I don't trust always reporting to Model Mayhem. I think we should. I think, we really should, but I guess I haven't done it in cases where I probably should.
Yeah. Also, I believe that Model Mayhem has a policy where you can't say something negative in a verified credit or in a comment. The only time that you could vaguely indicate that you had a negative experience with somebody is in your bio, where you've written stuff about yourself. You could put a list of people that you do not recommend working with, but you're not allowed to say why. So people have to kind of, jump through hoops to find your page and see if you referenced who to not work with. So that does make it hard to see negative reviews, which is another reason why it's good to be in these group chats or Facebook groups of other models where we can easily access each other and give each other this information about certain photographers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and another thing is, what if their account gets removed, but then they make a new one, or they make a new one somewhere else? I guess, we still want their accounts removed because certain people will still not do their due diligence and end up working with them and having a bad time. So we want them removed, but it's like almost easier to keep track when people bring it up. Oh, hey, yeah, don't work with this person. And certain people still don't know, even if it's like a, multiple incidents perpetrator. And so then we can share their link and go, yeah, this guy, you know. So in a way, it's good for them to have a profile somewhere so that we can like make connection.
Yeah. When photographers change their name and start a new profile, it does make it harder to track down who did what. But oftentimes they'll still use old photos from their previous portfolio. Obviously, they're not starting a whole new portfolio every time they make a new alias. So we can kind of help point them out.
Yeah. So it's just a little tricky navigating, I would say. And one point I brought up too is when people will ask for images, they'll ask for your current look. And I see a lot of us models that are experienced and especially you've been dyeing your hair and changing it, the last year or so. You'll post current look photos in your highlights on Instagram, and it is good to do that because that is one thing I've heard that models will do that's not okay is that, say they have a model for 4 years and they gain some weight. It's perfectly fine, to shoot people of all different bodies. But what's not okay is to advertise your previous size and use old photos and falsely advertise. And then you arrive with a totally different body type, or your hair is blue, or you have a new tattoo, or all these things.
Yeah, totally. If a photographer thinks that you have no tattoos because you've advertised yourself as a tattoo-free model, and then you show up with tattoos, you have falsely advertised yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's not.
I don't know if that counts.
This is kind of
counts as catfishing.
Yeah, this is definitely segueing more into the part of the episode where we're going to dive into why it's important for photographers to also check references and do their research on the models that they're looking at working with, because we've all seen it. We've all seen a photographer rant on Facebook about something that happened that easily could have been avoided if they either worked with a vetted professional or did some research on the person that they're working with. And before we get into all of that, I would like to share some of these stories that people have been posting on the Facebook prompt that I posted, just to kind of display what kind of stuff is out there that has happened to other people, just so that photographers listening who maybe not maybe something hasn't happened that's negative with you yet because you're not shooting as frequently, or maybe, you're not sure why it's important for you to like do your research in advance. But, there are a lot of reasons why it's important. So how about we'll do this. I'll read a story and you can tell me what went wrong and how it could have been avoided. How's that sound? Okay. And some of these are going to be kind of like take it with a grain of salt because it might be unprofessional, but perhaps it could have happened with a professional model. So, okay, here's the first one. Photographer says he had a model drive up to their shoot. She parked in front of his house, paused, and then drove off. Apparently, she had a mini panic attack and had to reschedule, but it was certainly like a kind of moment. So it seems like she freaked out, possibly with the anticipation of the shoot. Like, how would you describe what was going on there?
Yeah, that's a definitely tricky one. Of course, not knowing the person, and what they deal with, that's really hard to know. I mean, and he could take that personally and be like, oh, well, because you didn't feel safe the first time, I'm no longer interested. But he didn't, I read that story and, I think I've actually heard it from him before. And like, she came back later and they shot and it seemed fine.
Yeah. So in those instances, it's like, okay, you could be upset that, the model had a panic attack. Perhaps she was not an experienced model. That's the only thing that I can think of is if you're doing this all the time, it is less likely that you're going to have to cancel last minute due to panic or anxiety. So it's like one of those, when you're working with somebody that's new, that kind of thing might happen. However, I will say that there's often times where inexperienced models will cancel last minute due to anxiety, but instead of telling the photographer that they're nervous and they want to cancel because of that, they'll come up with another reason, which is often one of a couple different things, like their grandma died, or they popped a tire, or they got called into work, or they're sick with food poisoning suddenly.
Yeah. I think in cases like that, that's really, like, it's not okay to say someone died that didn't die, because like, that's just, you're calling upon yourself bad karma. Like, let's not invoke your grandma dying for real,
Yeah.
Like, and then if you've told like 6 people your grandma died and then your grandma actually dies, it's like the boy who cried wolf. No one's going to believe you or care now.
And that did happen to me once. My grandma died in real life and I had to cancel a whole tour in real life. And I told everybody the truth. And because of the stigma of the grandma died, like common excuse, I included an attachment to every email to each photographer I was canceling with an image of my whole family standing around my grandma's deathbed to prove that I wasn't lying. And I look back on that and I'm like, oh my God, I feel so embarrassed. Like, of course these people trust me. Like I have a good reputation for showing up. Why would they think that I would cancel a whole tour, and lie about it? So Anyway, I just kind of wanted to reflect. That was kind of funny.
And also along those lines, I think as a model, it's really important. Like if you're going to be 15 minutes late and for whatever reason, you woke up late or just whatever reason, like just be honest and tell them what's going on. Like when you're going to be late in advance. So like an hour before, because maybe the studio can actually be adjusted to just start the time when you arrive or something, but maybe it's not, and they're out 15 minutes of your time and they still had to pay the 2 hours from the studio.
Yeah.
But either way, you should be honest. Honesty is always best.
True. If you are really anxious and you're worried about doing the shoot because you're anxious, just say that. You don't have to say that your tire popped. Like, it sucks either way. Like, it's going to suck just as much for the photographer if your tire popped versus you had a panic attack. But in the case of the story that I just read, she was honest and she did, try to show up, couldn't handle the anxiety and had to leave. So, I mean, that's how it is sometimes. Okay, I have another short story that I'll read and you can reflect what your opinion is on this. Okay, this photographer says, one was when I tried to set up a rope shoot, the quote manager was actually running her FetLife profile and wanted me to pay full rates, which I usually do pay full rates, but he would do all of the rigging by his design And he would also be shooting the model that I was paying at my location.
Whoa.
What do you think about that?
That's a big nope.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would just pass if I was the photographer once I found that out, more likely, because it sounds like, the manager's the problem, but the fact that the model still has the manager, there could be multiple factors going on. That person can be, totally abusing them, and they don't realize they shouldn't have a manager. Or, so you could say something like, please let the model know that when she no longer has a manager, I will hire. I mean, who knows if the manager will say this, right? But it's like, yeah, that's just.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just say this. I don't know any experienced vetted models who have a manager traveling with them that goes to shoots with them. I don't know any good models that do that. The only models that I know that have legit representation, that manager is not traveling with them and going to the shoots and also shooting them. That does not make any sense.
Yeah, the shooting them is the worst part, actually, because, okay, yeah, you want to do if you're already a rigger and then you want to tie the model and then you're hiring her and you want to shoot her, it's your design, it's like I've had plenty of photographers that were also the rigger, and as long as they use, make sure and let me know whenever you're uncomfortable, you this and that, and they're very kind about it. It's like, it's fine, I can deal with that, and so we do cross the boundary of into them, don't touch the model thing. But it's a different type of touching the model when you're just tying somebody. But anyways, yeah, just the whole thing of then taking over the tie and then also taking photos. But taking photos is, like I said, I think that's the worst, because it's like, not only are they not saying, oh, well, I'm going to take behind the scenes, well, for me, behind the scenes is like you're including the photographer potentially like in an action pose, or it's just a quick video for a reel and that's it, or you do like a quick time lapse of the whole tie process. But then it's like from there, you shouldn't be involved anymore. It should be the hiring photographer shoot.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I would say that if you're a photographer, that if a model says they're going to bring their manager, just don't do the shoot. It's not going to be good.
Yeah. I have an example that was sent to me. I posted this morning and got a little bit of feedback. So behind the scenes. So this photographer says, that he's had people who didn't really respect the time and if they're only hiring for 2 hours, he can only afford to hire for 2 hours from my experience with him, and that they would take a lot of behind the scenes and then spend time posting it immediately after immediately during the shoot instead of waiting till after, and then also they would like focus on the phone, looking at the phone instead of paying attention to the camera, and that's really something that's a little bit hard to get a reference on, I feel like, because they could be a good model overall and have, say, a positive credit on Model Mayhem, but this would be something that's a side note that you would say, this is why it's important still to directly reach out to people, even if they left a positive credit, because then they might say, oh yeah, she's great, but she's a little bit like too much on her phone the whole time. So maybe just lay down some rules about, please don't do excessive behind the scenes. And I've had to instigate this rule myself because I run, the Muses of the West tours. And with that, we've had a couple instances where models were taking too many behind the scenes. And it's like, either start your video and leave it running for your time slot with your photographer, which is often like a 25 minute time slot, or that's going to be a long video. But, I'll take myself and just cut out the good parts of it and then throw the rest away. But then it's like, I'm focusing on him, not on the camera, right? Or on the video. Or you just say, hey, can you take a quick little 1 minute right at the end of your time slot where there's the buffer between, but because you just can't do that. These guys are paying you, you should be focusing on the photographer and making that connection between you and the camera and not worrying about your phone. It is disrespectful to the photographer's time, and models need to pay attention and be respectful.
Unless the photographer is also wanting to use those reels or BTS footage, if you're being hired, you're working for them. You're not creating your own content. You're working for them.
Absolutely. This is not your OnlyFans creation time. Sorry, but you need to do that on your own time.
Yeah. Setting up a BTS with consent is if you're not like continually modifying your camera's position, if the photographer's okay with it, like I've done that in the past. I used to do that a long time ago. I would bring a camcorder with me when I traveled to make BTS videos of my tours and of my life. But I always asked photographers in advance if they were comfortable with it. And if they weren't, then I wouldn't do it. And I wasn't just like fucking with my camera the whole time. I would set it up and that was it.
Yeah, and consent goes both ways, truly. And I actually did one time have somebody get mad at me for taking a selfie. And there was a studio in their living room where they just set it up in front of their TV, the backdrop.
Mm-hmm.
Then, all the other views of the room, it's their bookshelf and, some stuff about, that would reveal their personal life if someone knows what their home looks like. And he was very private about that. And I didn't realize, and he's kind of an interesting character already. So sometimes it wasn't clear, like certain communication things about what he really meant. He was a little bit cryptic, but he'd walk out of the room. I took a quick selfie and a little sexy, like turnaround video, like 30 seconds to send to my husband. I wasn't even going to post it. And he saw me do that and he was mad. He was really mad. And he's like, oh, well, you could have asked. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't, I meant to ask. And then I was just like, thought I had a quick moment. So I would do it. And he's like, well, it's too late now, and it's like, by no means was I excessively taking behind the scenes, but that's why you should always ask how they feel about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that if photographers were in their own photographer chat groups or Facebook groups, they could ask, hey, what was it like working with XYZ model? And they may be an amazing model, but maybe they're excessively on their phone or always taking selfies or making you take videos of them. And you wouldn't know that just by looking at their portfolio. Most photographers just look at a portfolio and they're like, oh, I want to shoot that model, but they don't know anything about like what it's like to shoot with that person because they aren't really taking the time to ask their fellow photographers who have worked with that model what it was like. And if that kind of a thing like selfies and shooting BTS and all of that kind of a thing rubs them the wrong way, they could avoid that experience or at least set expectations with that model in advance. Like for us, we always chat with each other. If somebody's a time waster, or if they're just going to talk your ear off and then never book you, then we'll just tell each other that so that we don't have to go through the agony of dealing with that kind of behavior. But photographers could be and should be asking each other, what was it like to shoot with XYZ model?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of times when I've heard them say, yeah, they just don't. I think most of them really don't. There are some that are connected because they might go to the same events and they're in a certain circle. So they'll ask each other, but there's often times where they don't, but I've also the opposite where I had a photographer reach out to like 6 or 7 people, on my credits list. And he said that everybody got back within 2 days with glowing reviews. And I think that's great. I really appreciate that. But also, you need to realize too that, and, disclaimer for everybody, it's like if someone leaves you a credit, most likely it's because they had a good shoot. It's more so the people that you don't post photos of, that took photos of you or that you took photos of, that you had a bad experience or that you didn't leave a credit. So there's going to be people that are hard to find.
Yeah, exactly. I have another story. This isn't one that somebody posted, but I think it's a very valid story that, could open a lot of eyes for photographers, especially photographers that like to shoot a lot of TFP with local models because it's fun, it's energetic, there's no pressure if nobody's getting paid, right? So this is a story that happened with one of my friends in real life. Earlier in my modeling days, I was doing a body paint shoot with a photographer that body painted that I had worked with a bunch of times. And 2 of my friends who would come to my party house a lot wanted to be body painted too. So we agreed to do a shoot together, the 3 of us, where we would all 3 get body painted and pose together. We were painted like cyborg robots, and the photographer was gonna edit the images like really CGI backgrounds so that it looked like we were like on another planet and stuff like that. It was totally fun sci-fi. But one of my friends who showed up, she said that her boyfriend would only let her do it if she didn't take her underwear off. And the photographer who was doing the body paint was like, well, the paint is going to be, it's not going to show up right. It's going to be really hard to edit around that if there's the panty line, because the paint absorbs into the panties and it doesn't look right. It's not going to be the quality that I'm hoping for with these photos, which is something that I understand, as a nude model who's been body painted a lot. And this gal was like, you know what? Fuck it. I don't care. My boyfriend's the one that cares so much. Like, let's just take the panties off. Like, we're all naked anyway. So we went through the shoot. He body painted her nude and we all had a great time. And the images came out really fun and everybody was happy with them, except her boyfriend, who saw the photos, saw that she wasn't wearing panties in them, even though we were like highly edited body paint robots, right? There's nothing weird or sexual going on. He freaked the fuck out and he started sending that photographer death threats. And he was like, you better delete all those pictures and take them down. And so sadly, the photographer body painter was pressured into deleting all these images. Even though he had a model release, technically, legally, he would be able to use them. He didn't want to deal with the threats and the negative drama that he was getting. And that's the kind of drama that you could get when you're working with somebody who's not experienced. They might have a psycho boyfriend, which is often a detriment of working with like non-professional models. And it's not the model's fault. It's the fact that they don't have a support system around them of people who, support what they do, or the people who aren't supportive haven't been kicked out of their life yet. Like when you're new to modeling, then you don't know like the negative things that could be happening to you or to the people close to you, like in this situation.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, luckily I was already modeling when I got with my husband, but honestly, I think he would have still been supportive and like he's been supportive the whole way. But there's times when, family members assume things or, I'm mostly really lucky in my situation, but I've heard a lot of stuff where it feels, I feel bad for these people, really bad because, they should just trust you that you're doing your part and that, after a point, you know what you're doing and getting yourself into.
Yeah. And I know that for some photographers, there's an allure to working with models who have never posed nude before, or they never been body painted before, and it's their first time, and there's some kind of an excitement because there's a level of trust in that. But that's when bad stuff could happen afterwards. Like oftentimes, if that model doesn't already have a lot of that work out there, they will contact the photographer and ask them to take it down because, they're getting married or they have a new job. And there's a lot of wishy-washiness that comes around working with people who aren't full-time professionals. And oftentimes when I see photographers complaining about this sort of thing happening to them from a TFP shoot, I have a snarky comment that I sometimes leave, #top reasons to hire professionals, because we're not going to come with this bag of drama, and it's going to be a positive experience where we show up on time, not hungover, reliable, with good poses and lots of creativity. But there's a lot of photographers out there that are not willing to pay, and so they are missing out on all of the positive experiences that they could be having if they worked with vetted, experienced models.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I have a crazy story that's about a model. Okay. So this is my experience. All right. So I was in this situation. So anyway, in my early days of modeling, I used to work with this guy who has passed away since. I worked with him all over the place. He was unhinged too. He would make you do an overnight trip, a cold shoot, and a body paint shoot before you get paid. Now, in my early days, I didn't know better about this, and I was being trained to an extent, so it kind of made sense to me that you should start off TFP and work your way into paid. So anyways, so we went on this overnight trip. I actually brought my oldest son, who at the time was only like 4 months old and breastfeeding, but there was 2 other models. And so we were just going to take turns, and they had already been around him, so they were just going to help with him a little. So we went out from Salt Lake to Wendover to shoot sunrise on the salt flats when there was water on it. And this guy, he was like a major geology nerd, so he like knew all these things, and he would actually quiz us on the way in and give us bonus money, or well, give us fun facts on the way in, give us bonus money when he would quiz us on the way out if we remembered what he told us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, mostly models are on their phones a lot, not paying attention, I think.
Okay.
And that's why. But anyways, he was fun. But we were going to, you know, drive in, and he knew where to drive safely without getting stuck in the salt flats, because people will get these really expensive tow fees. So anyways, we go out, we shoot in the motel room, and then we're going to wake up early. But the one model, and actually both models in this situation did bad things to this guy, but he was also his own problem.
Mm.
So anyways, the one girl in this situation, she ended up all night arguing with her like ex-boyfriend and drank a whole bottle of Fireball. Okay.
Oh, God.
So then he had stayed up to like hold space with her, but and I wake up and it's like probably 7:30. The sun's already up, and I'm like, oh God, why didn't you wake me up? And you know, and like he tells me what happened, and I'm like, you know, we could have just left and we could have come back, and then ended up, you know, they would have still been asleep or something, and we would have gotten to shoot and not had the drama people with us. But you know, he didn't, so whatever. And anyways, so that was a bummer, you know, in that situation, it's hard to know that that was going to happen unless, of course, he knew she was having ex drama, and that she was like, you know, she was a substance abuser potentially, who knows?
Mm-hmm.
These are kind of hard things to know in advance, right? The other thing about the other model that I think is really important, and why even if you don't take a picture of a model's ID, because I know there's a lot of people not wanting you to do that for safety reasons for themselves, I understand. But I think you should look at the IDs of models that look kind of in the barely legal range, because the other model apparently was only 17 the whole time, the whole year I worked with him at first. She was 17 and had a fake ID that she was 19. And so then he found out after the fact, like after the year was up, and had to destroy all the images, and a bunch of other people in the community had also shot with her and had to destroy their images as well. So, you know, I would say, and I've heard this from other photographers where they say they generally try to shoot people that are 21 or older instead of just 18. And I think that's a good policy.
Yeah, just so that you're not going to have to deal with like the drama of teenagers.
Yes. Anyway.
So if you're targeting models who just turned 18, just be aware that you're possibly signing up for like some intense drama. And I think there's a lot of photographers out there that know that still do it anyway because they have some kind of an obsession with the barely legal thing. But, you know, to each their own. I'm not going to poke that bag too hard. But what I'm saying is that, you know, it's implied that they're working with somebody who's not experienced and might potentially be very unprofessional. So that's a whole bag right there. But
yeah.
Go on.
I was reminded of something. So you were talking about like working with people who, you know, never done a nude shoot or never done a body paint shoot, right? So I have this photographer who is local to me, and I've worked with a bunch. Now he won't hire me anymore, but he has then since wanted to offer me a $50 incentive fee to help him scout models and get models to work with him. But he only wants to pay like $50 an hour now, or like $75 an hour. So like, you know, it's super low, but he wants to work with people that are brand new. And so I refuse. Actually, I will not like enable this, because unless they've expressed interest and I think they can handle it on their own, then maybe I'll connect them and get my $50. But I just feel really like iffy about this whole thing, because he has told me and complained as I got more experience that, oh, I was too posed now.
Yeah.
And this and that. But then I had looked at some photos that this fan that found photos he took sent to me that I had forgotten about or never seen. I don't know. But there were all these poses where I feel like I thought I had posed in a way that wasn't showing my crotch area. But 90% of them were showing. So it's like, you know, you get in your pose and then he adjusts his position and had taken the shot. And so I think that's one of the reasons he likes to work with models, is because they don't know their angles, and they can't stand up for their boundaries as much and say, no, you can't shoot that way. this and that. And so,
Yeah.
it's just like, that's, I think, an incentive why a lot of people, or a reason why a lot of people want to shoot the newer, or I don't know. And he also, I will say, oh, well, I know this person, and he'll say, no, I have someone picked out, and then he'll want me to go talk to them for him. And I'm like, but why can't you just give them your business card and have your work speak for itself?
That's
very icky to me.
He sounds like he's a little creepy.
Anyway, so, be wary of people, I think, that have a lot of younger looking models in their portfolio, if they have a lot of crotchy shots, just all these things.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say, though, that we're, as experienced models, having blacklist information about photographers who have this kind of behavior is very important. I will say that there was a blacklist going around in Seattle for many years that a lot of inexperienced models had access to and were contributing to it, and would leave notes about photographers that they felt were not great experiences, but they would put notes in there that were not blacklistable behavior into the blacklist. And a lot of photographers' names got added to this blacklist for stuff that was not blacklist behavior. For example, one of them was a photographer had posted things on Twitter that indicated that he was, body shaming models of certain sizes, which is like, okay, that's tasteless, but it's not blacklistable. And another one was a model had an experience where, this is another one where it was her first body paint shoot, and she was shooting with a body paint photographer who was very well known in the community, very loved by many. And he had suggested it would mess up the paint with the panties. And she didn't want to not wear panties. So she said that he was coercing her into a nude shoot that she wasn't comfortable with. However, she said she really liked all the photos in his portfolio, which are not involving panties. And so she left a blacklist note on this spreadsheet that had been getting passed around the Seattle model community. There were a lot of legitimate blacklist predators on that list, but because there was a lot of not blacklistable behavior on the blacklist, somehow, somewhere, that list ended up getting deleted because it was a shared spreadsheet document that models would just pass around with each other. All you had to do was share the link, and then other people could edit it. Anybody that had the link could edit it. It got completely deleted. So now that blacklist is gone because it was in the hands of people who were irresponsible with it. And so this is another, it's kind of a tough thing. We want to bring safety information to the new model community, but there are a lot of new models that will cry wolf over things that are not necessarily blacklistable.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, as much as you want to be what we call a girl's girl, and there are times where the model or the woman is in the wrong. And I don't think that, women are always right. It's also I don't think the customer's always right, So yeah, but it's important to look at all the sides, and remember that, some people will take advantage just because of their position.
Yeah. And, I'm not saying that I don't believe certain things have happened when people state them, but I have witnessed and seen models who are not experienced, who do have a history of drama, posting lies about photographers because they didn't get their edits in time. They will post straight up lies about this person because they were pissed that they didn't get edits out of a TFP arrangement and stuff like that. And this is just another reason why it is important for photographers to check references with their friends or even with other experienced models. If you're a photographer and you are friends with a full-time experienced model that you trust and you're considering working with somebody, ask around, even if it's your model friends, because we're aware of what's going on in the community. We can help you out. If we're aware of a model that is problematic, we'll let you know not to work with them.
Yeah. I've told this to many photographers because I had a couple recently say, oh, well, I'm not really sure about like sourcing models on Model Mayhem. There's a lot of people that are local to my state or my area that just don't seem like they're really, into this or my style of model I want to shoot, too many tattoos, whatever, their style is. And I'm like, well, just ask me, I'll let you know. Like I can recommend people to you if you want, and it's good. And I think that case too, to ask them for permission to send people their way, because I've had a lot of people get overwhelmed with Model Mayhem and say, I don't know. I don't even want to look at the travel notices or the local people. I'd rather just have you recommend people directly to me. And if they come from you, I trust that they're good. And I'm like, whew, that's a lot of power in my hands. It's like, I don't want to. This is another thing is, no name dropping. We have this in the community that even if you passed on to somebody, that's like, let your own communication and your work speak for itself and don't name drop.
Yeah, totally. I do think that name dropping is very like irritating when somebody's like, oh, I worked with so and such and so and this person and that person in this workshop. And I'm like, okay, well, here we are together to work together. Can we just focus on what we're doing?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Well, it's like on one hand, they're doing it to make themselves look safe. On another hand, they're doing it to make themselves look cool.
Yeah.
Or ride on their coattails. And it's like, I've been guilty of it. And it also then had to be pointed out to me like, hey, don't do this. It's not a thing that it's cool that we do. And I was like, oh, I wasn't aware. It just wasn't even something I consciously realized. So when I've had models ask me for advice, that's one of the key things I tell them is, you don't name drop. If someone shares a list of contacts, just send out your message to them on your own. And if they choose to work with you, it's based on that and your look and not because of who you know. Because like I've even had situations where someone thought they were in good standing with someone, like the model thought that the photographer liked them. And then they send and they say, oh yeah, and you can say I recommended you. And then that actually backfires because then later, even if they do hire you, they proceed to tell you something about that model they don't like. And I'm like, oh, so it's like, I just think overall, unless you 100% know and you had that photographer say, yeah, and feel free to tell them, to say that you sent them. So I know. It's really like a slippery slope.
A slippery slope indeed. Yeah, I think so too. So in summary, like, I feel like there is some kind of a shift in the community of photographers who shoot models frequently that could be done beyond just leaving Model Mayhem credits. Like, what I believe is that there should be a more compassionate community of people, especially photographers, who will talk to each other. And I'm confident in saying that because, I don't have too many skeletons in my closet. I don't think that there's going to be many people that are talking shit about you and me, like, because we know that we are reliable and we know that there's a lot of people out there that are not reliable. But like, as people who are really active in the community, you and I and many other peers of ours know that if photographers were hiring vetted, experienced professionals, they would have positive experiences. Yeah, obviously there's always exceptions to that, but I hear so many negative stories and complaints from photographers that could have been avoided if they worked with somebody who was professional.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's just the same thing with, first time models deserve a chance, same as first time photographers, but you pick your poison, be really cautious. Everybody should be cautious. Men should be cautious. It's just like, oftentimes, this is a little side note, but like I'm a mom of boys, right? And I'm the oldest of 6 kids. And my dad was always very wary of us girls getting molested or something. And he would warn us of the people in the community. So I grew up vigilant of these things. But then when my little brothers were little, he was not as vigilant. And one of them was molested. And so it's like, women can also be not only, the abused, but the abusers. And in multiple different ways. And it's important to be aware. Like, I think oftentimes it's just like the abuser is always thought of as a man. And I think that's very sexist personally.
It is. I mean, the statistics do show that it is a lot more common in that way, but there's also a lot of people who get abused who don't report it because they don't want to be viewed as, not manly or, weak or whatever. So I'm sure there's a lot of unreported abuse going on. But to that note, like in respect to all of this, like communication with your peers could help alleviate some of these issues. Like if a model or anybody that anyone works with has a reputation for drama, coercion, inappropriate behavior, like whether it's a model or a photographer, like this should be known. And if we were communicating with each other, just like the model community is pretty good at communicating with each other about this, photographers in turn could also avoid a lot of issues if they, did their research and communicated. I think that though there is a perceived weakness in men in particular in grouping up to chat with each other about these things, I do think that photographers often see each other as competition, where in the past it seemed like models would see each other as competition. Right now, I think that there's a lot of ego and cattiness and competition between photographers, which is why there's so many photographers that say they don't want to do group events because they don't want to be associated with other photographers. Now, you probably work with a lot that are cool with group events, but there's a lot that aren't because they view their peers negatively, even though they oddly all have so much in common.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where I'll ask photographers when I come to an area, oh, do you know anyone else in this area who pays traveling models? Because if I can get 6 paid shoots, I'll come out, blah, blah, blah. That's my minimum requirement. And they're like, I don't know anyone. And I'm like, but how do you not know anyone? It's like kind of frustrating. And also, I feel like, yeah, the guys really do need to find some amount of camaraderie. I do understand that there's like, gearheads that can be annoying. They're all about their gear and just like, or, things like that, or the way they come across with their ego and they don't get along. But, I do wish that there were more photographers connected with each other. And I do encourage them to stay in touch after they've potentially met through me or something,
Yeah. All right, Jessa. Well, I think this has been a really good episode. I was concerned about the topic not having enough time to fill up an hour, but we've certainly filled up more than an hour. And I feel really confident that this would be helpful to photographers listening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hope everyone, just takes their time to do a little bit of extra research to make